I lived in a house with an extremely long, winding driveway. We grew up surrounded by the woods, and when it got late on summer evenings and the sun finally set after busy days of playing with my neighborhood friends, the darkness swallowed up our little plot of land, and it seemed like there was no end to that sea of trees around us. Like it extended into ink in every direction. Naturally, I was terrified of those dark woods, for reasons I couldn't even really explain. So as I got older, doing outdoor chores at night got harder and harder. Sometimes I'd just have to take the trash to the curb. I ended up being assigned to that job. Me, out of all of my 4 brothers. Now, I don't know why my mum picked me, but I assume it was because I was always the most cautious one. The first time I had to take the trash to the curb at night, I begged my dad to go with me out of fear. I kept doing it. So eventually we got into the habit of doing it together. He didn't seem to mind so much anyway. That is, until the night it happened. The sunset was actually beautiful that night. The fireflies danced under swirls of purple and orange. We get pretty sunsets all the time around here, but something about this one was different. It was beautiful. It was like Mother Earth was rewarding us for hard work on that day. We just finished demolishing an old shed that got crushed under an even older tree. It was uprooted by a summer storm. The clouds seemed to gather like witches around a fire in the heart of the forest, blocking out the gibbous moon that stared down at us like our mum did when we were in trouble. Thanks to the cloud coverage, it was so dark that we could barely see our feet in front of us as we were walking that familiar path down the barely paved drive. My dad cracked some kind of joke that I can't even recall, and I chuckled to ease the tension. I'd taken to walking as quickly as possible down that winding path when it was dark out. I'm sure the reason for that's obvious. My dad could just about keep up with me, even when I was young and spry, and I wanted to spend as little time under that dark sky as possible. The trees on either side of the path loomed over us, but I could just barely make out the cloud-smeared stars past their jagged edges. I could hear my dad's footsteps behind me as I gripped the black trash bag closer, the plastic strip that made up the handle getting sweaty in my hand. I focused on that sound to calm myself as my nerves started acting up, anxiety nipping at my heels. Rhythmic were my dad's footsteps. He had a limp. Had gotten his leg twisted up years back in a bad car crash, and it never quite healed right. The dull slap of his bad foot on the pavement steadied my thoughts. He was with me, and the world seemed safe. The woods even seemed almost warm. After what must have been at least a few minutes, I finally saw the end of the driveway. The stinking dumpster was a relief. It meant the trip was at least halfway over. I practically ran up to the dumpster, focusing on the rotten yellow of its lid rather than the thick woods ahead of us. I didn't want to look too deeply past that tree line. As I slammed the trash in, my dad passed me. I felt a cold chill pass down my spine when he stepped out onto the road, staring off into the woods or maybe the sky. I couldn't exactly tell with his back facing me. My thoughts were hijacked by the sensation that my rear was no longer protected by my dad's mystical presence. I shot that thought down. He wouldn't be able to protect me anyway if there was really something wrong. Weird night tonight, huh, kiddo? My dad's rough voice came drifting over. I stifled an audible intake of air, not expecting him to say anything. He was a man of few words after all. I didn't know what he meant either, and I was already uneasy. Not really, I replied. It was just an average night, right? What was weird about it? I shut the lid to kind of emphasize my point. I didn't want to seem rude or talk back to my dad, but I was done being here, out so far away from the house. The light of the house was now just a dim glimmer through the trees. The path back curved sharply at least 2 spots. I turned away, I took a step or two, ready to head back as quickly as possible. Are you afraid? I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart stopped too. Everything stood still for a second. I couldn't even begin to formulate a reply. My breath caught in my frozen lungs. That was not my dad's voice. It felt like an eternity before I was able to move even an inch. Every fiber of my body wanted to flee. My only sanctuary was somehow wrong, and I didn't know why. I forced my feet to turn themselves around. Maybe my dad was just putting on a scary voice to prank me. He did that sometimes, knowing how cautious I was and why. Maybe he'd just gotten a frog in his throat. My mind clung to these fragile hopes as I looked back over my shoulder at him, hoping to gain some kind of information or at least find out if he was okay or not. My dad was standing in the middle of the road with his back facing me. Dad, what's going on? I asked in a tiny, frail tone. He gave no response. Then he slowly started turning around, painfully slowly, with inhuman, almost robotic movements. One foot after the other, head swiveling around to face me as if it were detached from his torso. His legs, his arms, his torso, one part after another, like some demented Terminator. I shrank backward in horror. Absolute, uncontrollable horror. My brain lit up with fear, my nerves suddenly blazing with a primal fear response. Everything about this was wrong, and I had to get away. Get away anywhere but here. I stood there pissing my pants in absolute terror for what felt like an eternity, but it must have only been a few seconds. He turned his head halfway again before I bolted, and I'll regret that second before I started running for my whole life ahead of me. Because I just saw a tiny bit of his face. Its face. It wasn't him anymore. I don't know what it was, but it was not him. My breath burned in my lungs as I frantically scrambled back up the driveway, my vision going blurry. The clouds parted overhead, lighting my way back as my flip-flops slapped hard on the pavement. The moon trained its eyes on me from its seat in an inky black sky, seemingly drinking in my fear. Behind me I heard something. Crunching and thumping footsteps that didn't belong to my dad. It sounded heavy and plodding. Too heavy, almost like a bear or something. And I definitely couldn't hear a limp. I remember running further on that night than my body wanted to. My legs nearly buckling out from under me. Adrenaline took over as I followed the black serpent of the driveway. My thoughts were a blur. Panic pulsing through my veins. Every second half expecting to feel a cold, clammy hand gripping my shoulder. But the hand never stole my soul. I pounded up the stairs, threw open the front door, slammed it shut with all my strength and locked it as quickly as my shaking, sweaty fingers would allow. With my back pressed against the wall, I slid down and wrapped my arms around my knees. My face burned from the tears, the warmth of home doing nothing to comfort me as I struggled to catch my breath, my feet aching. A few shuddering, painful gasps were all I could manage before another thought trapped me in frozen, stiff silence. What if the lock wasn't enough? What if this thing got in anyway? My eyes flicked up to the window in the door. I was terrified I'd catch another glimpse of that ghastly pale thing that might have once been my dad's face. But seeing the emptiness of the night sky was somehow worse. I took another breath as I got to my feet, gripping the door handle as if, in the event of the lock failing, my own grip strength would keep the thing out. Looking back on it, yeah, that's laughable. But at the time, I was acting on pure instinct. And that might explain why I stupidly peered out through the glass, scanning for any signs of life. I strained my eyes, trying in vain to see anything past the tree line. Even with the clouds parted, the woods held onto their secrets with a tight grip. After a minute or two, something finally changed. The dim light couldn't hide the trees shaking, the leaves parting, and something screamed. I leapt out of my skin. An outstretched fist connected with something meaty. My dumbass brother. He materialized out of thin air. The door behind him ever so slightly ajar. Ouch! What the heck? He complained, rubbing his cheek. I cussed him out, my panic and rage overflowing, my head shaking from how hard I was spitting insults at him. After several minutes of back and forth arguing, I finally calmed down enough to explain the situation to him. And don't worry, I'm not an idiot. I know it made absolutely no sense. When I finished, he just gave me this weird look, like I'd grown a horn on my forehead or something. Dude, are you okay? You been taking your meds? He asked me this quietly, shifting his position, and I could tell he was in discomfort. Something about his body language said, "Are you high?" Which only annoyed me even further. You either need to believe me or get the heck out of here right now. I began to tell him off. Make yourself useful and go tell Mum or go tell the damn cops. There's something out there. Something bad. He took a step back in retreat at my yelling, but didn't go anywhere. He rubbed his shoulder, looking aside. Okay, I believe you. Look, calm down. We both fell quiet, looking at each other